Hi, I'm Sinofsky. I started at Microsoft in 1989 and worked through all of 2012. And although I held many jobs, I started as a software design engineer and ended as the president of Windows. I was born in New York City, and for the first 10 years of my life, lived out on Long Island. When we lived in New York, my parents had worked in the fashion industry, which was a very classic first-generation American Jewish kind of upbringing. And but my father just could not commute on the Long Island Railroad anymore. And so he said, got to pick up the family, like the Beverly Hillbillies almost, and moved us to Orlando when we opened up a family business in sporting goods. My father was really a very astute business guy. He was a buyer for women's coats and suits, and that got him into just being a wholesaler and a buyer in general. And what got me into computing was him. He opened up this business in Orlando, and that was in 1976, 75. And then he bought an Osborne 1 computer, which was a 64K, the first portable machine that came with 5 programs, a word processor, which was called WordStar, a spreadsheet called SuperCalc, which was a clone of a spreadsheet called VisiCalc, which was the predecessor and inventor of the spreadsheet, and a couple others, including something called MBasic, which wasn't to be confused with another program it came with called CBasic. So I ended up writing an inventory and accounts receivable, payable sort of system. But I didn't know accounting law or rules or anything. I just sort of made up all this stuff. And the summer before my senior year of high school, I ended up, a teacher of mine's husband also had one of these Osborne computers, which it was huge. It was like the size of a sewing machine. It weighed like 35 pounds. There were all these people, like all of maybe a dozen in Orlando, had bought Osbornes, just like my father, and they had no idea what to do with them. And so I would go to each one, like there was a banker and a talent agent and a real estate agent, and I would just ask them what they wanted and write some program for them to do something. Like a talent agent wanted to take a list of all of the people she represented and be able to search across them for, like, do they have blue eyes, or are they 6'2", or what size do they wear, and helped her do that. And I would write these programs like that for that summer. I think asking what computing meant and how it inspired you is such an important thing, because it's so tied to the history of Microsoft. Because using a computer, what it allows you to do is create your own world where you're just in charge. The Time Magazine Machine of the Year, which was the 1982-3, I'm actually going to get the year wrong on that, which is annoying. The Time Magazine Machine of the Year came out when I was a senior in high school. And I was also taking the SATs. So I got it, and I was all over it. I love the issue. I still have the one that I had at the time. It was an important part for me. And so I get to Cornell for college, and I'm in the arts and sciences school where you can major in whatever you want. And my assumption is that I'm going to be like a biology major or a chemistry major and go to medical school. I was abysmal at chemistry. So I actually ended up not yet deciding, but just double majoring in chemistry and computer science. 2 years into a year and a half into graduate school, I'm going to leave. And I literally sent my resume to Northeast 36th Way box, whatever it was, Redmond, Washington, on the box. Next day, after they got time to get it, I got a call. Hi, Stephen. This is Chris Witt. I'm a recruiter at Microsoft. She's like, I'm getting you a plane ticket. We're going to fly you out for interviews. And back in those days, when they meant get you a plane ticket, it meant that an envelope from Airborne shows up. I'm in a college apartment, and this Airborne guy shows up, and he's in a uniform with a truck and hands me this overnight envelope with an actual ticket to get on an airplane. And so I'm like, I'm going to Washington. And I interviewed with 7 of the smartest computer people I had ever talked to. And so Chris calls me, makes me a job offer, and I'm being all coy. Well, I'm going to have to think about it. And the offer is cookie cutter. There was no negotiation. There was nothing. It was $27,500 and 1,000 shares of options or whatever the offer was. I remember 27.5 because it was lower than the other offers I had. And I called my uncle who worked on Wall Street. He told me the options were worthless. So much for Uncle Harold's financial acumen at the time. But I'm thinking about it. I'm being the idiot trying to negotiate for more salary. And so I'm walking into the lab one day, and there's a message on the chalkboard, not a whiteboard, that says, Stephen, call Bill Gates, he called. And I'm like, whatever. I ignore that because I told a friend of mine that I went to college with who was from Seattle. And so I just ignored it. And then I got home that day, 12 hours later, and there's a message on my answering machine. Hi, Steve. This is Bill Gates. Could you call me back, please? I ignored that. I just assume it's this friend of mine, Brent. Next morning, go to the lab, new message. Steve, Bill Gates called again, call him back. And this went on like for 3 days. Finally, I'm home and it's late. Guy named David Pritchard calls me. And David says, oh, I'm really glad to get a hold of you. My name's David Pritchard. Bill Gates has been trying to get a hold of you. And he really wanted to talk to you about your job offer. And so I'm like, oh, so it wasn't fake. My first day, because I got hired into apps. And that's all that it really said on the offer letter. And when you got hired into apps, then it was a very small window, about 2 years, where all the college hires were hired into the Apps Development College called ADC. And it was run by Doug Klunder and Dan Newell. Unbelievable experience to be in the Apps Development College. One day you show up and it's like, today we're going to learn how to fix bugs in Word. And literally you brought up what was called RAID, the Word Bug Database, and they'd assign a bug to you. It turns out it was a copy of the Word code from that point in time and the database. And, like with people that I was in there with, like Antoine or Andrew Craze or Dave Schulman, we just fix bugs. And then Doug would ask us to write code and explain to us how to write real bulletproof code. The apps culture was all kids. The systems culture were all these grown-ups that had jobs elsewhere. They were hired. They had been at Microsoft 5 years. It's a different world. It was the Bill world. The apps culture would become the Mike Naples world. Word and Excel, we're like, well, we know what a word processor is, but we're going to do one that's just so much better. And we're going to do that by thinking about how you do design, how you do user interface. To build a spreadsheet, we're going to put on suits and we're going to go to the banks on Wall Street and learn how they might use a spreadsheet and make it better. So Jeff tells me, there's this job that I need you to interview for. And so he says I need to go talk to Bill about being his technical assistant. Bill was very worried about how a developer could do this job because they don't understand the big picture or anything like that. So I get this job and I have to just figure out what to do. But the big thing was, this is basically starting in late 1993, early 94, and Chicago, which became Windows 95, is under development. Well, in February of 1994, February always being an important month to visit Cornell, that's when I visited when I was in high school, I fly out to do my twice yearly recruiting trip. So I'm at Cornell, staying at the same hotel, go to the same Kimball B11 engineering, all the same stuff, except it starts to snow. And they're shutting the campus down, which they never really did. It was bad. And the school, it's just complete whiteout. You can't go anywhere. So I walk over to the computer place I'd worked in as an undergrad. And I actually, out of my mouth come the same words that used to make me groan. Hey, I graduated here a few years ago. Just want to talk to you. And I see the guy's eyes roll. And I have no self-awareness about how ridiculous I would sound to myself. And I just proceed to ask him to tell me everything about it. And he starts taking me on a tour of the facility. And he starts showing me how students are using Macintoshes. And I'm blown away. They come into the room. They don't have to sign in like we used to. They just pop a disk in. They get this menu called Bear Access. The Cornell mascot's a bear. And they log in with their Cornell ID. When I'm like, I was TGUJ at cornell.edu. And they get their names, and it's like crazy. They check their mail. There's mail from professors. There's mail from other students in labs, and then they pull the floppy out. They leave. They print things. They do, and there's this thing called the internet. that they connect to. Now, I knew what the internet was. I'd been using it since I was in college. We used chat and FTP and all this stuff. I did internet with people at the University of Wisconsin to work on the synthesizer. But this was like with pictures and stuff. And I go back the next day and I'm watching the students pile in and do all this. It's mesmerizing. I'm trapped. There's nowhere to go. Like, I have nothing to do. I just spend all day and I'm randomly talking to students who clearly think I'm some freak. And I go back to the dorm and I bang out this giant memo describing everything I've seen called Cornell, and I call it Cornell.doc or cunet.doc. And we had 8 character names, and and the subject of the memo was Cornell is wired in all caps, like the new magazine, Wired magazine. I send it to Bill. Bill's like, you need to send this to Brad Smith, or to Brad Silverberg, Brad SI. And I send it to Brad, and Brad's like, you need to send this to John Ludwig. So I send it to John, send it to Brad. John says, you need to send this to Jay Allard. So I send it to Jay Allard, and Jay's like, oh, you got to read this. And he sends me back a memo. And his memo is the Embrace and Extend memo about the internet. And it's called Writing the Next Platform, right? Is that the name of it? Windows, the next killer app for the internet. And it's about Windows and the role of the internet. And Jay, turns out, I go, as soon as I get back, beeline for Jay's office. He tells me his story about working at Boston University on the internet. They had developed WinSock with David Treadwell and some other people. And I'm like, okay, we're going to have to do something big here. Go back to my office, and I just tell Bill, I'm setting up an internet in my office. We're going to have an offsite. Bill does the thing where he draws a calendar on his legal pad, turns it sideways, and he's like, okay, how about April 5th? I'm like, okay. So we had the offsite, and I got to say, it was only like 4 weeks from the time I finally got back, talked with Jay, and had the offsite. It was absolutely crystal clear that the internet was going to be big. And by the way, the offsite was held the day after Netscape was incorporated. It's poetic. And then we had the offsite. I wrote up the notes, and I was obnoxious about it with Bill. I said, look, Bill, this is what we're telling everybody. And I'm not trying to take credit. It was obvious. I was just doing the legwork, the legwork. I said, nobody should be asking questions about the internet and researching it and deciding if it's going to be a big deal or not. Our bet is on the internet. So that went out. And then we just had a sprint to get to August of 1995. And so we did all that, and Bill just had to write a memo to cap that. So that became the tidal wave memo. But it was like a year and a half later from all of the work that all of these people did. And it was like sort of the summary of the whole thing. The internet made a bunch of people, particularly in the investment community, think that the next thing was the one that was really going to take off. What they didn't see was that the internet needed a reliable, broad-based, technically competent platform to put in your home and on your desk. And so the internet turned out to be the biggest opportunity for Microsoft just to sell PCs so you could get on the internet. And so that's why the back to school and the Christmas in 1995 present was a home computer, because that was how you got on the internet. But very, very quickly, everyone involved realized that focusing on Windows was just a much larger market. So, but the company itself, there were just 2 things that are just so important. We were maniacally focused on being the best technologists. And that comes straight from Bill. And it was just, we had to know the technology better, write better code, faster code. We had to understand the architecture better than everybody else. That's how Visual C++ beat Borland. It's how Excel beat Lotus 1-2-3. It's how Word beat WordPerfect. I mean, these products, you could look at all the reviews from that day, and our products were just better. The other thing that we were, and this comes from Steve, and Mike Maples, was we were focused on winning with products, not technology. And so we were focused on turning technology into the best implementations and use of the technology into something that you could do something with. The legacy of the company that I am most fascinated by is And people don't recognize this, but before Microsoft, there was no substantial software industry. There was not a unifying force that brought computing together. And what Bill did was democratize computing for the masses. He brought low price, easy to access computing, which in turn brought programming to whoever wanted to do it. And so that's the legacy of the company, is just democratizing computing. And when people get all cynical and they talk about how Microsoft wasn't the first to do X or the first to do Y or didn't invent X or they're missing the point completely. Because what Microsoft did was what all companies do. I mean, Kellogg didn't invent breakfast. We took all of the technologies that were available and chose to do a certain thing with it. And what Bill did was just figure out an important part of the equation, which is how do you make enough money to pay salaries and build a business? And then how do you make it so other people can go build a business? That's an invention in itself. And that was the legacy of the company. We didn't invent computers at Microsoft. But we put the whole thing together. And it's just remarkable.